more challenging now than it was before. But I think for the most part, that's a good thing.
How has the landscape changed in the relationship with police and law enforcement? Because now everyone's doing it. People are sharing on social media. People have their theories. People are questioning everything. Does that somehow hinder you from getting information? Are they less likely to speak now, or are they more likely to speak now because there's more pressure?
I think it depends, but from my personal experience,
sure,
it's been better because I've had law enforcement agencies, state agencies who've reached out to me in a professional capacity to ask for my help based on the audio tapes that I have or the video that I have on whoever or the whole case in general. So I think that in a lot of ways, there are agencies out there who want to solve a case who aren't afraid of trying something different when they're stuck. I mean, if you have a cold case and it's been sitting there for years, either you're trying something new or it's just going to sit there and die. And so I think there are some people that have a more nuanced take on the whole thing that are willing to give it a shot. And it doesn't have to be me or even a podcaster in general, but if there's someone who's actively been investigating or is actively investigating the case that you're assigned to, in my opinion, that person should be your friend. Whether you use that information or not, I think that you should be aware of what they have because that only make you smarter in the first place.
What's your obsession right now?
There's too many. I don't know. It kind of goes back and forth, but I'll say that lately I've been working on a new season of Up and Vanished, and I've been going back and forth to Alaska all summer in an environment that I've never been in before, and it's a totally different beast out there. And it's been very interesting to see how the law enforcement conducts itself out there, and the cases I'm looking into are completely bizarre. And I'm at the point now where I'm kind of closing in on the circle of suspects that I think may be involved. And I'm kind of back to the same thing that has me in this chair with you today. I'm doing it again. And I want to do the best job I've done yet. And so I'm just trying to, find closure and see what I can dig up.
So Alaska, South Georgia, these sound like small towns.
Yeah.
You prefer small towns, or you're going to head into the big city to solve something?
I mean, I think that for Up and Vanished, at least, the town itself has always kind of been a character in the story. And I've kind of liked that part of it, where it may be something different than what you're used to. And there's so many places like that, not only in the U.S., but in the world. And it creates a different dynamic. And so I want to go to a place where, especially at this point in time in my career, where...
Come on, how old are you? I'm an old man. You're a young kid this time of my career. So let me ask you this. So as you sit here today, surrounded by all of this, do you think this is what you do the rest of your life?
Absolutely not.
No?
No.
So what's the next thing?
I mean, I may always show up to CrimeCon. I may always sit here with you. I may always see you guys, for real. But no, I want to be able to tell stories on an even bigger platform or more platforms and expand what I do and just not get complacent or stagnant. And I'll always have the passions I do for the stories that you know me for.
Yeah.
And I'll always end up going back to that in some way or not. And I think that for me, I want to just keep everything open and just tell big stories and not be afraid to go poke around and find out what's going on.
Well, let's talk about being afraid. What was the scariest moment in any of the stories that you've been investigating?
I would say there was a suspect in season 3 of Up and Vanished who lived in the middle of nowhere, Montana, and I located his address, and I was pretty sure he was there. And we drove hours out there in the middle of nowhere, and I went and knocked on this guy's door. And I got led into his house by his brother, who actually thought I was there for something else, even though I told him what it was, and there was some confusion there. And it ended up being this very awkward scenario, like deep in his house in the kitchen, where he realized what I was actually there for and that I wasn't this person. And once he discovered who I was and what I was doing, he was not very happy with that. And so I spent the next 45 seconds as I left. He asked me to leave, and I did. But I was like, well, he's going to say something. I didn't come out this way for nothing.
Right.
And I think that the comments he did make told the listeners and the family what this guy's all about, at least his character. And I think that was important for people to hear because he was some boogeyman that had never spoken. And we got him to talk, and turns out he's a bad guy. So
let's talk about a couple of bad guys.
Okay.
Duke and Dukes.
Duke and Dukes.
What's your reaction to how everything ended up in court? I mean, in front of a jury and the end of this incredible journey.
I think I put too much stock into the state and to the GBI. Even though I had seen mishaps in the past, and I know that people had changed over and it wasn't always the same guys, but I was just convinced that if they were going to go so hard into Ryan Duke and ignore all the other things about Bo Dukes and every other aspect of the case, that they must have had something else and they were going to pull it out there at the end. And when they didn't, and they ended up bringing my name into it and Up and Vanished and the podcast and all this stuff that had no bearing on this case, I wasn't flattered. I was pissed. I was annoyed at that. And I feel it's a shame that it seemed like pride got in the way. And I've talked to people at the department who I'm cool with, and it doesn't. I don't mean that for everybody who's there or whoever worked there, but I think they dropped the ball, and pride was the reason. And I hate to say that, but I think that's true.
Do they ever find her remains?
Did they?
Will they?
I mean, I've heard that they did, but I mean, it wasn't very much, but there was enough there to validate that spot in the orchard.
Sure.
And so, is that completely true? I don't know, but I've heard that from enough people long ago when it was first happening.
Right.
I believe it to be true, but maybe it's not enough to, in the court of law to definitively say anything, right?
Right. So we're here at CrimeCon. What's your what are you doing here?
I came here with the Tenderfoot team, my podcast company, and I had a panel today, and we're just meeting listeners and other true crime podcasters and hanging out with you and the Core TV people. Just having fun and just meeting new people and just hearing other stories too, and just learning from other people.
And is there any story that you've heard here that you're going to take another look at?
I mean, I've heard so many. It's one of those things where I have to go back home or on the flight back, go through my phone or go through my emails and really kind of take it in and digest it.
How many stories get pitched to you?
Too many. I mean, not too many. Too many for my ADHD brain to compute. But for me, I have to go back later, and then I'll recall what we were saying, and really kind of those details will kind of land for me. And so I'm excited to kind of dig into some of these stories because, unfortunately, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of unsolved cases, and there's parents here, and there's family members here of victims, and so I think it's really cool of them to come out here and just be here at all and show their face, because I think this community as a whole is very supportive and wants to help if in any way they can.
I think that's why they're here. I think
it's smart of them and it's bold of them, and kudos to them for doing that.
Payne Lindsay, great to see you.
Cheers, man. Hey, good to see you.
All right, we can do a handshake. Here we go. Awesome job. Payne Lindsay, Up and Vanished, Tenderfoot, amazing stuff. All right, folks, we're live here in Orlando, CrimeCon 2023. We're bringing in the heavy hitters. Payne Lindsay. Up next, we're going to be talking about the Delphi murders. Don't go anywhere. Craziest thing you've ever heard?
Name anything at all, and I've heard it 10 times probably. In the time I've been there, I've probably handled one way or another over 1 million calls. So,
how many lives have you saved?
Probably too many to count. It's almost every day.
I've worked hard all my life. I've gone from being a local reporter to becoming a law student to then even going on to teach other lawyers, all before I came to Court TV. As a journalist, lawyer, and teacher, I learned the secret to success is speaking in your authentic voice. And I bring that lesson to my show, Opening Statements, every morning on Court TV.
Opening Statements with Julie Grant. Weekday mornings at 8, 7 Central, only on Court TV.
You don't think she did
I
it?
don't think she did.
Wait. She's from Boston, and she's telling me Karen Reed didn't do it.
No, Karen Reed didn't do it. I just don't think her backing into the boyfriend at that rate of speed at that time of the night
That's a great point. The rate of speed.
would kill him.
Okay. I'm buying it.
So, no, I don't think Karen Reed did it.
Everybody's got an opinion here at CrimeCon 2023. We're live in Orlando. What a scene. What an absolute scene down here. But you walk around and you talk to people. Everyone's saying, are you doing Delphi tonight? What time are you doing Delphi? Well, we're doing Delphi right now. And joining me, investigative journalist and author of Down the Hill, Susan Hendricks is with us. And, of course, retired police, I got a teleprompter's going a little slow. Retired police commander, host of the Profile Evil podcast, and the author of the book Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. Mike King is with us. All right, Susan, quick question.
Yep.
Who is more casually dressed tonight? Me with a jacket, no tie, or Mike with a tie, no jacket?
Ooh, I think that's up in the air. A or B?
Who's more casual?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm thinking you are. No tie.
I'm a little more casual. Mike's always formal. All right. Let me start here, Susan. Your reaction to what we read this week in the Delphi case, this new information, these allegations by the defense.
Here's the good news. I saw the headlines. I didn't read it purposefully because I just thought there was so much information. And when I heard that it was more than 130 pages, I thought, could be a tactic to get around the gag order. So I decided, why am I going to put everything into knowing that? My focus is on the families, Abby and Libby, meaning, yes, this will come up, of course, and Judge Frangel, she will come back with a decision. Will the prosecution respond to what we saw? I know what's in it. I saw the headlines. I watched you guys together, and it's interesting, to say the least. But to me, they're trying it in the court of public opinion, which they're not supposed to do. So we'll see what happens. But it's something that it seems bizarre overall.
So you're thinking it's more of a tactic than meat on the bones?
Right, absolutely. I mean, a lot of meat on a lot of bones there, right? I mean, but it's throwing everything against the wall and seeing what will stick. It'll be interesting to see Judge Frangel and how she rules or how she decides, because I think absolutely, could they file that? They want of course, the search warrant to be thrown out. So that was what? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 pages?
It was 130 pages, 130 pages. And
they could have condensed that. That's what they want to focus on. Great. That's a good defense attorney. When you bring in everything else, I believe it.
One of the things, though, they brought in was a description of the scene that many of us had never heard before, or
peppering maybe truths from what they knew around.
So you're saying it's not everything.
It's not everything, but they're peppering in what we haven't heard. And so much we haven't heard, but that's part of the case. And I believe it's because the authorities said, look, we don't want false confessions. And in the media, do we want to know? Yes. Do we have the right to know? At times, we don't have to know everything. It's not our right. If there's a gag order, there's a gag order.
Right. This was a document that was filed, so they were able to get around it. I've seen it in other cases. Mike King, let me ask you. The investigators in this case, the investigation, did they dot the I's and cross the T's from the beginning of this? Were there missed opportunities?
Yeah, Vinnie, I think hopefully they did. We don't know, because we're not going to really know the answers to that until we see a response from the prosecution, perhaps even the investigators themselves at some point along the line. And we have to remember that a good investigator isn't going to talk a lot. So they're going to be holding a lot of stuff close to the vest.
All right, let me ask you this then. Does your gut tell you that they investigated all these theories about this Odinism? A word I never heard before. I'll be honest, I never heard of it. I know a lot more now than I did in the beginning of this week. But do you think that they fully investigated all those leads?
My gut tells me that they did, Vinnie. If they were made aware that this might play a part in this investigation. And, you know, I chased Satan for a lot of years doing ritual crime, and it is a natural response to get all spun up when you hear these wild things, because our mind can't wrap itself around such a horrific event. We put our own value system on predators too often, and we say, I'd never do that. How could this person ever think of doing that? And so when an investigator learns these things, they're going to follow through on it. They might tuck it away, and I'm not even necessarily upset that some of these allegations that they didn't share that they had talked to somebody about Odinism or something else. If they looked into it, they cleared it and said, nah, I think it's a rabbit hole that's not deep enough, then they're going to move on to something else. And, you know, when you're putting a search warrant out and you're petitioning a judge or you're getting ready to go to trial, you don't want to throw a bunch of noise into that thing. You want to keep the judge and the investigation focused on where you're going. And boy, I'll tell you what, if this thing has done nothing more than create a whole bunch of noise and speculation.
Oh, it's a lot of noise. A lot of it's coming from me. A lot of it's coming from me. Every night we're doing this. Susan, one of the allegations here by the defense is that there are this group of 3 investigators who aren't seeing it the same way that Liggett sees this investigation. And from what you've seen through the years, did you feel that there were different factions of this investigation going in different directions? Do you feel like some people are saying there's a little bit of pride involved, that people get attached to a theory and they're afraid to go away from it?
Exactly what Mike said in terms of the noise and investigations. I believe what was telling to me throughout was that there were names tossed around that we heard. And, you know, the sheriff would say to me, look, we're looking into them. But never would they say out loud, they've been ruled out completely. Even family members, they didn't rule out on purpose. What was telling to me, no one was ever charged until they were. So I believe we didn't see, as you said, behind the scenes in terms of the investigation. We have to trust that. Well, the defense went all in and saying it could be this, it could be that. I just believe it's damaging. It really is. I believe that for the case. And I believe investigators did the best they could. Superintendent Doug Carter has said time and time again, we can't tell you or mention what we think. You need proof. We have to tell you what we know. And right now we're keeping that close to the vest. And even he said, look, it breaks my heart. I can't tell family members what I know right now because I'm protecting the investigation. Because it has to go to trial. Someone's charged, great, that's one step. You have to prove it, and they have to be found guilty or innocent, depending. This is all noise. I feel like it's another distraction, again.
Well, another thing the defense is saying, impossible for one man and impossible for Richard Allen to have done it.
Battle the experts, then. Impossible, yes. Maybe someone on the stand says, no, it is possible.
Mike, from looking at the scene and knowing what we know, right, about where they were, how they ended up, what the bodies looked like, does it strike you as one man?
I don't know.
Or does it have to be more than one? They say it has to be more than one. They're saying it has to be.
I absolutely disagree that it has to be more than one person, but it possibly could. It's really hard to tell that, but we have to think about the fact that, number one, we can theorize that whoever was there had a gun, because that came out early, and we have evidence to support
and that wasn't in the documents, right? I mean, the bullet, was that not in the documents? Meaning, like, why'd they leave it out, the defense?
No, they talked about the bullet. They said that there weren't a lot of photographs of the bullet. That there's one photograph that's on the ground, and then the chain of custody of the bullet goes away.
They want that out. They want that out. Yeah.
But we get that notification that there's a weapon involved in this thing early on. That can gain control of 2 people, especially 2 young people, really quickly, Vinny. We also know that, from what we're reading, that the injuries were not caused by a gun, but by a sharp instrument. So that tells us that this predator or predators wanted this to be really personal. It had to be up close and personal. And we know that there was a level of disorganization because of the way things kind of unfold and the evidence that we're hearing about. The condition of the bodies, the posing, and the staging. And those are 2 different things, you know. And
wait, explain that. What's the difference between posing and staging?
So staging would be potentially, if, for instance, this room... Yeah. this rune idea, that could be staging, something to kind of create a mysticism. Richard Ramirez told me, I painted a pentagram on the wall because it just would throw people off and make them think devils. So staging is this thing you do to divert the attention of the investigation, to get people to look different directions. Posing, on the other hand, is when you start to manipulate the victim after death and you start to make the crime scene look a certain way. We see it sometimes in
something happened here, right? Because one child is wearing the other child's clothing.
Yeah, so you really start thinking about things like who's preferential, if there's a preferential victim, and was one of the children more of a kind of apologetic, let me try to clean the scene up a little and tuck this one away, but the other one is not. All of those things, with the limited amount of information that we have, are things that an investigator has to consider as you look at the behaviors and how those behaviors tie in against all of the traditional forms of evidence we talk about all the time.
All right, Susan, I know you're extremely close to the family.
Okay.
They're right here. So let's talk about what was revealed, right? Was any of this new for the family that was put in these defense?
I didn't ask them because the gag order's in place, and I don't want to have information that I have and then talk to the media, and then it's out there, which is the gag order's in place because of that. So it's not, right now, it's not something we talk about. We talk about the girls, and we talk about the memories, and we don't talk about all of that because you have to prove it in a court of law, as you know. Is it a tactic? Maybe. And I had a question. Is that why we've seen it before, the delay tactic? Is that why that happens? Or is it more time that goes on, the better? I've seen that in different cases, not here maybe with the trial. But I remember Paul Holes telling me that, look, the justice system is not friendly to the victims and the victims' families. It's just not. No. Right to a fair trial, of course. But all this noise, it's sickening at times.
So I'm looking at this case as a former prosecutor. And to me, anytime you have specific people that the defense is looking at, there's an upside and a downside. The upside is that you, as the prosecution now, can prepare to explain to the jury why these people were suspected, why they didn't do it, which is great. The danger always is, though, if there's one juror or more that doesn't believe they did it, because that's not what the defense has to prove. They just have to, a juror just has to believe that that's a potentially reasonable explanation. And as a prosecutor, that scares me. The cases where they don't put anything out there, I'm like, they're not putting anything out there because they've got nothing, because the killer is on trial right now and charged. In this one, it looks like they're going to be pointing the finger in a very specific direction.
Casey Anthony, we covered it together. It was the dad in the opening statements. Was anything ever proved?
She had to bring the name up, right? I've been in Orlando less than 24 hours, and she's bringing up the name. She's bringing up the... No, I'm only kidding.
Shots at the I know. But all of a sudden, Jose Baez, he went out swinging in the opening statements, and you don't have to prove it. What? But was that enough doubt? Obviously, it was.
And I could see the same thing here in the opening statement. They're talking about Odinism and this and prison guards and ritualistic.
Doubt.
And then for the rest of the trial, the jury hears all the evidence, sees the evidence through that filter. That's the danger.
Absolutely.
How do you get any sense of how confident the prosecution is in this case?
I don't, but I think that it will be interesting. I know that they wanted the gag order in place because remember that first document from the defense attorneys kind of saying, oh, Ricky wouldn't do this and this isn't Rick. And so the judge obviously, you know, through your experience, doesn't want to taint possible jurors who are out there. I don't know. I think silence is powerful at times. I mean, this document, it's...
Yeah. But what's interesting when you talk about not wanting to taint the jury, the shoe's on the other foot right now. 9 out of 10 trials I cover, it's the defense. They want everything shut down. They don't want any publicity. They hate court TV, no camera. This defendant wants the cameras inside the courtroom.
I wonder why. What do you think?
My guess. No. My guess is the defense wants the cameras in the courtroom because they want this aired publicly for whatever reason.
Well, now I feel like Judge Fran Gull, who was part of that testing program, and like that from what I read in terms of is for it overall, I would think. And I think now she kind of has to because of all these theories. Like, people have to know, because there's been, I think the silence, though, it was difficult for Superintendent Doug Carter and all the investigators involved. It was difficult. They shut everything down. That allows for speculation, and it snowballed. And there was speculation.
Well, and I agree. I think that's one of the reasons they want cameras, because they want all the evidence out there, exactly. And then people will interpret it the way they will. At the end of the day, though, once the trial starts, to me, it's irrelevant because the jury listens to the judge.
Yeah. Calvin Perry, remember?
Yeah, and they base their verdict on what they hear in the courtroom.
Yeah.
They never base it on what I say, what someone says on social media. Jurors take their job seriously. Now,
I agree.
Tell me about the book.
What I really wanted to do was to talk about my experience with the families. When I started writing this, no one was in custody, no one was arrested. It was a story about the families and how much just what I gained from them and meeting them, and they're amazing. They're over here. It changed me as a journalist and as a person, and so that's what I wanted to get out. So many times, and I know it's what we do, you know that, with Scott Peterson, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson, we're talking about the person accused or the person who did it. It's rarely about just the damage and the aftermath of when the camera goes away. The family's still dealing with this, and so it's tough.
It's forever, even if there's a conviction. I never use the word closure.
Oh God, I learned that too.
No, there's no such thing. The way I try to put it is, if a victim can get justice, right, then they can turn the page. But they're not closing the book. No. They're just turning a page, and hopefully they can sleep a little bit better. No, because I always look at the alternative. And I know the family is listening now, but that alternative is scary to me when you don't get justice. You've lost your loved one. Mm-hmm. You've lost your daughter. Mm-hmm. And you don't get justice. To me, that's unthinkable. And that's one of the
accountable.
Yeah, and that, to me, that's the significance of all this. All right, Susan and Mike are going to stay with us. Speaking of victims, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Gabby Petito. Her family is here as well at CrimeCon 2023. Don't go anywhere, folks. We are live in Orlando. There she is, folks. Nancy Grace giving a hug. Nancy, can you give us a wave? Great to see you.
Hi, welcome to CrimeCon.
A tragedy in the Hollywood Hills. Prominent therapist Dr. Amy Hardwick found fatally injured under her balcony.
Her ex-boyfriend on trial for her murder.
She had a restraining order against him.
He strangled her, lifted her up over the balcony, and dropped her. He never intended on killing her.
Is this a case of a jilted lover turned obsessive stalker?
The Hollywood Obsession Murder Trial. Coverage continues Tuesday at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
Petito's brother came up to me and put a bracelet on my arm and said, "You remind me of my sister."
That's a big moment.
It was. So it's
Can we take a look at that? That's awesome. This is another reason that people come here. I mean, the big hearts that the folks have here for all the victims in all of these cases. That young woman getting the bracelet from Gabby's brother, and she was truly touched by all of that. And that's, you know, you have that part of you that wants to help solve the case, but then it's really, all of it is really a search for justice for the victims. Now let's talk a little bit about Gabby Petito, because her family is here as well. And still with me, Susan Hendricks and Mike King. And Susan, I know you're involved with the Petito family and what they're doing down here. Can you give us an idea of what they're going to be doing?
Yeah, I'm hosting a panel tomorrow with the family. Of course, Joe Petito, Jim, Gabby's stepfather, and of course Nicole, Gabby's mother, and Tara. And they've done so much. I interviewed Joe Petito soon after, and who can forget when he stood up in front of the camera and said, "Please help me find my daughter." No one could take their eyes off of that. And then we saw it as it evolved. And he did say to me, because it's a question I get often, why so much attention on the Gabby Petito story? And he said to me, "Susan, I don't know why, but what I do know is," because he knew nothing about this. He didn't know his daughter was suffering. Remember the body cam footage? He said, "I can't even watch that. That's not my daughter. It's hard for him to watch." But he said it was so, of course, devastating for him that he can't even watch the body cam footage. He said, "That's not my daughter." What he did say was what helps him is to help other people. And right now his family, I mean, they haven't stopped doing this, and there's the body cam footage. He can't watch it. He said a couple seconds he has seen, but really that's all. And their goal right now, he said, we're funding it in the state of New York, because I called him right before coming on to make sure I got this right. What they do want implemented as kind of a guideline, if you will, for police officers, because think about it, not all of us know exactly what the signs are. That's what's so tricky about it. And there's so much shame involved, so maybe people deny it. If that happened to me, I wouldn't tell my dad. I mean, you just don't, it doesn't happen. So there's 11 questions that he wants. That was a text that he got from his daughter, Gabby. I mean, think of that. And as a dad saying, what could I have done? What should I have done? Why didn't I know? It's just so hard to look at. But he's saying, so these 11 questions, he believes if they were in place there, his daughter could be alive. Meaning just, if you don't know much about it, ask the questions. If the question, you know, a guide, you know? So that's what they're doing here, and it's nonstop for all of them. And talk about a cohesive team. I mean, Gabby's family, I'm as tight as I've ever seen, and they work together and they're in it together. This is a whirlwind. I've heard that from so many people. There's no book on this. There's no playbook on what to do and how to do it. But they work together, and they're here to help others, which is why I think CrimeCon's amazing, because you kind of say, oh, I'm not in it alone. I'm not here alone. Okay, well, what did you do? Okay, this is what I did.
And I want to start first on what you were saying about why this was such a big story. I think part of it was the family's reaction. Yeah. Right? I've covered many cases through the years, and when the missing child or missing person's family shies away and is not out there, it's more difficult for people to get invested in it, and it doesn't resonate the same way. Which is, anytime I talk to victims, and I've talked to advocates as well, they say, be out there if you can. And everyone does it their own way. Some people can't do it. Right? I mean, if we had that tragedy in our family, you know, I would be out there, but my wife could never do that. Right. Could never do that. So, but that from my perspective on this end, you know, the ones with the cameras and the microphones, those are the cases, the ones where the family is out there, so you feel what they're feeling. To a certain, you can never feel exactly what they're feeling, but to a certain extent, you understand that this family needs help, and this family is lost, and this family is hurting. So those are my thoughts there. Mike, how about, we've watched that body cam footage tons of times, a lot of missed opportunities, and it seemed like the officers in that conversation knew that they should have taken both of them in and put them in front of a judge.
Yeah. You know, Vinnie, we've talked a lot about this idea that during that defund the police process we went through a few years ago and the demand to have mental health counselors out there. I was absolutely against sending a mental health counselor on something that a police officer should have to handle. But cases like this are the perfect example where someone who has a true understanding of the human psyche that can sit down, that isn't completely engrossed in things like officer safety and making sure that the boxes are checked, but somebody that could pull a person aside and say, hey, let's just talk a little bit about what's going on. And we might see that starting to happen. There has to be kind of a middle ground. And on the issue that you and Susan were talking about with this process of the family getting out there, law enforcement has to become better at handling these kinds of situations too, and counseling with the families up front with maybe a mental health counselor to say, here's how we're going to get the story out.
Yep. We're out of time. I'm sorry. I hate cutting off.
All day
Of
with
all
you
people,
guys.
says
Yeah, yeah.
Susan Hendricks, Mike King, thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. All right, folks, when we come back, I will reveal something else you need to know tonight. How do you get into the Hall of Fame?
So you are inducted by getting nominated across the country. We accept nominations. It can be posthumously, current enforcement, retired, and the best part about it is we showcase those positive stories in law enforcement that you don't hear about all the time. So we bring those to light, and that's what we're trying to do. And eventually the mental health program is going to come out, free and anonymous mental health care for law enforcement officers.
I've worked hard all my life. I learned the secret to success is speaking in your authentic voice. And I bring that lesson to my show every morning.
Opening Statements with Julie Grant. Weekday mornings at 8, 7 Central. Only on Court TV.
True crime can be very tiring. You guys look exhausted. What happened? What's going on here? What's...
Two red-eye flights.
2 red-eye flights to get here? Where'd you come from? Phoenix, Arizona? I know this girl from Arizona. Do you know her name? Jody?
I live in Mesa. She's up in Peoria. I've been wanting to go up there my entire life to go see her, so.
Welcome back. We're live at CrimeCon 2023 here in Orlando, Florida, and it's time now for me to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Take a look. There we go. Those missing posters, those children that we profile at the end of each and every program here from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Well, guess who I bumped into today? Callahan Walsh, Executive Director for the Florida Division of the Exploited Children Department. And Callahan is also the son of John Walsh and told me a story about a case that they're trying to solve. What is this all about?
So we're with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and this is a forensic reconstruction of a local case here in Orlando. This is the unidentified remains of a child, a 16-year-old female, Caucasian female. We believe about 16 years old, so somewhere between 13 and 18. Her body was found in a heavily wooded area that was formerly used as a garbage dump. There was no missing child report matching her description, so this case has gone unsolved. This child has gone unidentified since 1973. Oh, wow. So our forensic artist Joe Mullins here is doing a full forensic reconstruction in hopes that somebody here at the con may recognize this child, help us ID this child, and give them their name back.
That is awesome, awesome work. You know, every night at the end of the show, we profile one of the missing children from your organization.
Thank you very much.
Great work you guys do. Thanks so much. All right, folks, when we come back, we've got much more live from CrimeCon 2023 here in Orlando. CrimeCon. Follow me, folks. Follow me. Follow me. Why are you here? Really? Only at CrimeCon. Welcome back to Closing Arguments. I'm Vinnie Politan. Special episode tonight. We are live in Orlando, Florida for CrimeCon 2023. And as you saw, I mean, everyone is here. The passion, the energy, the friends that you run into here, absolutely amazing. Everyone here looking to understand this world a little bit better, this world of true crime, understand how cases are solved and how interrogations are done. Another place where folks like to travel here at CrimeCon is inside the mind of serial killers. Oh yeah, trust me, they do. And that's what we're going to do right now here at the top of this hour. Three amazing guests joining me. Here with me, psychologist, researcher, expert on violent crime, and co-author of The New Evil, Dr. Gabby Petito is with us. Also joining us, professor of forensic psychology and author of Confession of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of Dennis Rader, I call him Radar, the BTK killer, and also the author of How to Catch a Killer, Hunting and Capturing the Most Notorious Serial Killers. Dr. Catherine Ramsland is with us. And finally, they say she's a legend, author and professor Dr. Ann Burgess. Great to have everyone here. Thank you for stopping by and spending some time. Pass the mic around and give me your reaction to what is happening here in Orlando.
Well, Dr. Petito and I were on a panel today talking about a forensic psychologist who's a prison psychologist who did an evaluation of Ted Bundy, but we also talked about the Manny Cortez case, a potential serial killer that we are trying to link to other cold cases. But just walking around, talking to true crime fans, getting a sense of a place where they can come and feel comfortable and not weird, talking about their love of crime and the puzzles.
But you guys are analyzing them, right, as you're talking to them?
No, I'm not. Are you?
No.
No, of course not.
I'm off the clock.
Right.
I think it's an amazing kind of synergy of people that have a passion for crime solving, helping victims, people who have extraordinary insights into violent offenses that really should join forces on more and more projects. And there's something about bringing people together and just kind of getting them to chat in a room that creates this wonderful bringing together of minds. And I know that I connected with people today, legal minds, authors, even people who have themselves been victimized that really want to help. And so I think it's a fantastic convention.
I would just echo all of this. I think that the energy is amazing out here, and just seeing the people is, there's just a lot of interest and questioning. I think that there's a higher level of interest in the more academic. It's a very bright group. They ask the right questions, so you really are learning something. I think that's the other important thing, is that not only is it great to see everybody, but it's going to be teaching a lot of good things.
All right, let's go there. Let's go inside the mind of the serial killer. Where's the first place we stop on this adventure?
Well, I'll just start with the looking at crime scene and how can you profile from crime scene, because that's what actually one of the books that I wrote on, is how the FBI agents down at Quantico very early in their pursuit of profiling did it. And it was amazing how they would just spread out all of the photos on crime scene and start coming with not who did it. They never came up with that. They would come up with what was the age, where did the person work, what was his history with his family, did he have a job, those kinds of things. And then that information would go to the local police department that then would look at their suspects, and that's how it all started. So that's what I learned. Catherine?
For me, there's been a lot of questions about Dennis Rader, BTK, because there are some new ideas about him being linked to cold cases, and that's part of what I've been asked about while I've been here, but I also was on the panel with Dr. Gary Brucato, who looked in depth at the Manny Cortez case.
I think when people are interested in the development of a serial killer, we really have to begin looking at fantasies that arise in people who have been slighted by the world, humiliated, treated terribly. It's easy to take for granted how new that work is. It only goes back some decades, and here was really a pioneer of working with behavioral science to kind of understand psychosexual fantasies in individuals who commit these offenses. And people like Dr. Ramsey and myself have
explain that to me, the going from being humiliated to having these fantasies. How does a serial killer travel from point A to point B there?
Well, there's probably no better person to discuss that than Ann here, who helped develop what we know about that. So let me hand you off. Let me hand it off to her.
It starts early. I think that's the one takeaway that I found is that it can go back as far as childhood. And something comes up. It might not in any way affect somebody else, but for that particular, usually a male, boy, it means something. And then what happens is they get into the development of the fantasy, and they usually will use pornography as a way to kind of fuel it, but it's not in the sense that you think of it. Back in the studies that we did with the 36, they were back in the 50s and 60s looking at it, and many times it was just detective magazines that they would look at.
Really?
Yeah. And in fact, Bob Ressler did one of the interviews. I watched him. It was fascinating. He brought in 12 detective magazines, and he asked the serial killer. This happened to be a killer who had, I think, about 10 or 11 victims. And he would go through each cover and ask him what in that cover did he find exciting. And that's how he said this was his pornography.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is there a way to predict this? Is there a way to spot it? Because, when we think of serial killers, and I think what happens when there's one on the loose, and the way I cover it is, it's about the fear of the community. And then eventually they get caught. I know sometimes they cooperate and get studied and you learn from them. But have we learned enough where we can identify things before they start to kill?
Well, one of the things that happens is what we call rehearsal fantasies, where they're thinking a lot about what they want to do to somebody. And then sometimes they might make drawings. Like I know Dennis Rader used to draw girl traps on the board at school. They could have seen that. They could have wondered, what is that about? So the fantasies often lead to obsessions, and the obsessions might lead to acting out when the triggers are just right, when the opportunity presents itself. And we can watch kids who are doing drawings, violent drawings, that doesn't mean they will act out, but it's something we should pay attention to.
Let me ask you this, Gary, doctor. Sorry, all doctors here.
That's fine.
All doctors.
And friends, too.
And friends. A sex offender, I always hear like they have this uncontrollable impulse, right? And maybe they don't want to do it, but they succumb to this. Is that what happens in a serial killer, that maybe they want to try to fight it and not kill? Or is it a different dynamic?
It's a little bit complicated, but I think
that's why the three doctors are here.
It's a little bit complicated, but I think, there is a quality that some offenders talk about if you go in and speak to them that does sound an awful lot like a person describing an addiction, where they say that I did something and it aroused me, but then it wasn't enough and they needed to up the ante and do something a little more intense, so that you see things like progressing from, let's say, stealing underwear or peeping to then needing to commit sexual assault and then ultimately killing and then needing to torture on top of it and so forth. So there is that kind of progression. But the trouble with that model is that it gives the false impression that you're talking about something where there's no choice and the person is overcome with a need and they don't really want to do it. The truth is that these individuals describe an enormous enjoyment of this and very little regret, if any, of these actions. So that I think there's a psychological phenomenon of upping the ante for thrill, but it doesn't seem to have the remorse the next morning quality that you would see in an alcoholic or a drug addict or someone suffering from one of those conditions. What do you think about that, Ann?
Well, I think the other thing I would say is that it's an obsession with them.
Just put the microphone a little bit closer. Everybody wants to hear what Dr. Burgess has to say tonight.
It's an obsession. And it's almost a compulsion. We talk about them being very narcissistic and those kinds of things, but the obsession and the compulsion drives them. And they can't stop. To answer your question, they can't stop. At least one of certainly I had an interview with one, and he just said the minute I touched her, the victim, he couldn't stop. And yet he knew these victims. They were not strangers. These were women that he knew.
Okay, I have a question for all of you to answer one at a time. In studying serial killers, who is the most evil of all, right? Who wants to go first?
That's a Gary question.
Right, his book.
Right. Well, first of all, it's important to remember that we don't really think of people as evil. We just think that people do actions, sometimes often, that are so unnecessary, so beyond what is required pragmatically to commit a crime, so arising from a cruel place that we would use the word evil, which really comes from a Germanic word ubu, which means extra or beyond. It's that unnecessary element that you add because of your personality or fantasies. And I think, the book I did, The New Evil with Michael Stone, really it suggests that there's even a gradation where you can have a person whose acts are the most horrendous. I would say that the most horrendous offender that we looked at, and there were about 450 for that book, was David Parker Ray, who was a sexual sadist, murderer, some people believe 40 to 60 victims, who spent $100,000 to develop a torture dungeon called the Toy Box, which contained every manner of device for the exquisite torture of a woman who would then be drugged and hypnotized and made to forget the crime and dumped, if not killed. And that offender, because of his devilish use of his mind to devise torture devices that were so over the top, I think takes the cake for the most horrendous. And somebody who had absolutely no regret between offenses, somebody whose mind, he could have been someone who studied aeronautics, for example, but he used his brain for darkness. So, Ann, what do you think?
Well,
he's pretty up there in my mind.
Oh, right. He would be your number 22 level.
Oh, yes, he was at 22.
He has 22 levels of horror.
in the book, yeah.
In the book.
In the book.
In the book, yes. He certainly is up there. I think there are a lot others. I don't know whether, Catherine, you have any favorites?
Oh, she's got something to say.
Torture murders. But torture
Do
is
you have
the
one that you want to say?
No, I'll let you.
I mean, I think a guy who puts an ice pick into the ear of a teenage girl while she's alive and stomps on it with his boot is pretty horrifying. I think certainly the toy box killer, I agree with Gary on that, but someone who removes the breasts of women while they're alive is pretty horrifying. Yes. So anyone who's trying to do the most egregious physical harm for an extended period of time for their pleasure would be considered high on my list of people considered evil.
Okay, let me flip it. The most charming serial killer you've ever spoken to.
Why don't you start it?
Well, there are a lot that are very charming. They're very psychopathic, if you want to use a more clinical term on it. And certainly, I would say Henry Wallace was. He was a serial killer that could charm people, and everybody liked him. He was a cheerleader in high school. He was in the Navy. He got commendations, and until the wife left him, he had a pretty good record, but he was very charming. I think other people would say Ted Bundy. I wouldn't. No? Okay.
Not a Ted Bundy fan.
Well, but I've heard people who knew Bundy said he's not anywhere near as charming as the myth will have him be. He's not as intelligent as the myth will have him be. There is a myth around Ted Bundy that doesn't really work because he was nervous, he was insecure, he wasn't altogether charming. I know people aren't going to like me saying that, but the people who knew him well would say that. I think Charles Albright actually had a lot of charm. He's the Texas eyeball killer who surgically removed the eyes of his victims, but he convinced people of all kinds of things that he never did, never had credentials in, and yet got hired for jobs based on these credentials. He had a lot of charm, and yet in his dark side, he was removing eyeballs from his victims.
I have a letter from Charles Albright where he denies any crimes.
Of course.
Yes, and apparently was inspired by.
Did he charm you, though?
No, but he interestingly, I learned about him was that his mother was a taxidermist, and he became obsessed with the eyes put into stuffed animals
that she would not let him have because they were too expensive.
Yes, it's interesting because I have always found that. It is true that the psychopathic, kind of handsome Kenneth Bianchi type of serial killer can be very charming. But in my experience, the most charming, the ones that really disarm you and horrify you the most are some of these health professionals that are serial killers because they make you believe that they're there to help you. These are people that come in, dressed in white and sort of, and then the next thing you know, they're putting, fatal levels of, of a drug into your blood, and everyone is running, and they're the one that's pumping your chest and trying to rescue you, and they're racking up a body count of 60, 70, 80 people. There's something about that has an incredibly diabolical quality to it, and I think when it comes to charm, those are people that have really fooled you and are people that have often gone to excellent schools and have had friends and so forth, and yet they're harboring this dark side. And so that I find them the most creepy when it comes to this mask of sanity, as Keckley called it.
They're putting on a show. We're out of time for this segment. Want to thank Dr. Ann Burgess for joining us, Dr. Catherine Ramsland. Dr. Gary Brucato, you got to stay one more for us. When we come back, folks, more. We are live in Orlando, CrimeCon 2023. Up next, we're going to talk a little bit about the Long Island serial killer. I want to talk to some fellow prosecutors, and they're gone. Where'd the prosecutors go?
I was awakened by my brother screaming.
Pounding on the door, bang, bang, bang.
People don't realize human beings like that can exist in the world.
He said that we'd seen his face and there was no way that he could ever let us go.
They're not going to let me go easily.
You better fight and you better get out of here.
I survived because I'm a born fighter.
I Survived, tonight at 10, 9 Central on Court TV.
crime. How big is it, and how much are you enjoying the energy here?
We're so grateful to be here, and I credit the success of the Fox True Crime Podcast to the executive producer and booking producer, Devin Kelly and Catherine Horsford. There's an incredible team behind this podcast, and you know as well as I do that part of the reason that everyone loves the true crime genre, we love to be deliciously scared, of course, but it also draws attention to cold cases. It helps allocate resources so that people can find closure, so that families can get justice, so we can honor law enforcement, and so that we can tell the stories and center the victims.
Welcome back. I'm here at CrimeCon 2023, live in Orlando, Florida. And when you walk around CrimeCon, there's a thing called swag, right? There's T-shirts, there's buttons, there's all these things that a lot of the folks that are here are giving away. And as I was walking around today, as I'm interviewing people, talking to folks, and I'm looking like what they're wearing around their necks, I would say 9 out of 10 people, but probably 9 out of 10 women, were wearing the Body Bags podcast necklace. And guess who's with us? The host of Body Bags, Joseph Scott Morgan.
Hey, Vince.
Nice swag. Still with us, Dr. Gary Brucata.
Pleasure.
So this is my first time. You've been here many, many, many times. This is par for the course. What's happening here?
Yeah, I think that it is, Vin. I have to say that probably the population density at this one is beyond anything that I've seen to this point.
Right.
I've never seen as many fans here this time.
Will you be willing to share what just happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So you are on one of the panels giving a talk, right?
No, I'm not on a panel. I'm
solo,
singularly up on the stage.
One-man show.
Yeah.
And what were you talking about?
3,000 people there.
3,000 people. What were you talking about?
The Idaho murders.
Okay. Did you take questions?
Yes, I did. All the way through. The talk lasted for about 50 minutes. And I just went through you know me, Vin. We've known each other for years. I was there to talk about the forensics, what happened at the scene, or what I believe happened at the scene. But we started off saying that this was going to be a session where we would honor the victims. And we talked about them. You know, I'm a college professor, so I called roll. I named each one of the victims and said that they can no longer respond to a roll call. And I made it through the session, and then the very last person to ask a question was Ethan Chapin's mother. She just materialized. I didn't see it coming. I had no idea that she was going to be there, and you could have knocked me over with a feather. It was a moment in a crowd that big where a hush just fell over the entire crowd. And over me, I mean, how do you respond to that? I don't know.
And that's what, I mean, that's such an incredible example of what's happening here and who comes here.
Yeah.
And what it means. People are looking for information, for answers. Ultimately, I know a sense of justice. What kind of question did she have?
Well, it wasn't so much a question as it was that her comment that she made was pure advocacy. She stated that she wanted to let everyone know in this assembly, this assemblage of all these people from all over the country, the world, that these were good kids, that they were kids just like our kids, like my Noah at home, who's a college student, that they were sweet kids, regardless of what some media outlets may have said or what has been implied about anything. They were just normal college kids, and they were robbed of their lives. And one more thing I got to say, I don't know how she did it. It was the ultimate in, people throw around the term hero a lot. It was the ultimate in bravery as far as I was concerned, because, and I can only compare it to me. If it were me, I'd be in a fetal position and still whimpering. And after all these months, how she stood up there in front of that entire group and complained and stated that she was Ethan's mama was beyond anything I've seen.
Amazing moment.
Yeah.
So let's talk about victims. And we were going to talk about the Long Island serial killer, but let's talk a little bit about Idaho right now. I think that's more appropriate at this moment. Dr. Gary Brucata, when we talk about what happened to these students, and we try to answer that question, why? Like, why? Why on earth would anyone formulate in their mind an idea, a plan to sneak around in the middle of the night, go into a home where 4 young people are having some of the best times of their lives with their friends who they're so close for, that are getting ready to come into the world of adulthood, and decide to go in there and take 4 lives at once and destroy the happiness that was on that campus, the happiness that was in all those homes, celebrating what these children were doing. How does someone come up with an idea like that's what I want to do?
Well, on the panel that I was on earlier with Dr. Catherine Ramsland, we were listening to a recording of an offender, Manny Cortez, and Dr. Carlisle, who was talking to him, said, "How's the weather?" And the answer that he was given was, "It's not sunny outside of the prison, and I'm happy that it isn't, because now I don't have to be envious of all the people out there in the sun." Well, this is the logic of some of these individuals. There's a kind of an idea that they have been deprived of being able to relate to other people in a predictable way, being liked, being welcome to things, being loved, trying everything under the sun to relate to people in an appropriate way, and being rebuffed, made fun of, whatever. And an individual like that has a kind of a long-standing fantasy of leveling the playing field in some way, and of saying, if I can't have it, why should you? And so we have to take into consideration that there would have probably been a series of events that led to somebody repeatedly feeling humiliated, angry, bitter, so forth, and then essentially going in and targeting people who were emblematic of the kind of life that he was not able to have. Beautiful, young, healthy, vibrant, intelligent, wanted people. And when you see it that way, you get a glimmer of what might have happened there. But it's very difficult for the average individual to make sense of that kind of motive, because we wouldn't think that way. The average person wouldn't be that bitter or angry or odd. So I think we struggle, we grope for an explanation. What is very beautiful is that there are people who can make sense even of that, and then devote their lives to victim work, and going out and preventing anybody else from ever having to feel something like that for 1 minute, so that you defeat that darkness by loving people even after they've done something like that. You go out and you still love people, you help people, despite the fact that somebody deprived you, proving that deprivation is not an excuse to go out and be terrible to other people.
Yeah. Joseph Scott Morgan, Dr. Brucato said one word there that fascinated me: odd. When I think of the accused killer in this case, everything that we've learned, everything that we've been reporting on and seeing and looking at, seems to fit that description for this man.
Yeah, perhaps, and I think I worked a lot of cases over the course of my career where I had people that were savagely attacked by, I think, individuals that would be regarded as odd. Serialized offenders that have done brutal things over and over and over again. And Doc is right, because there's kind of a, well, first off, there's a numbness. There's a numbness that occurs, I think, that enables an individual to go into this, let's face it, collegiate environment. I don't really, where you're within, and I talked about in my talk today about, in a university, you're in kind of this protected bubble. And you don't see this kind of thing coming. That's why it was such a shock to many of us that are out there. For me, too, as an academic. But, when I put my death investigator cap on, my forensic cap, I began to try to understand it and what happened. And, it goes back to an old comment that I always make. We're always having, us in forensics and investigations, we're always having to try to understand the abnormal in the context of the normal. So when you walk into you walk into a collegiate apartment, okay, where people share in a communal sense. They've got the bathrooms, they've got kitchens and all this sort of stuff. They party there, they hang out, they study together. And then you've got this pure evil that visits itself within that environment. And you see the aftermath of it. You see, and I don't know that people at home can really appreciate probably what the investigators saw. We're going to find out.
We're going to find out.
We will find out, yeah.
All right. Joseph Scott Morgan, stay with us. Dr. Gabby Petito, great to see you. Thank you so much for helping us and sharing your insight. All right, we've got more to come here on CrimeCon 2023. We're going to be joined when we come back by someone who was with me when I was in Orlando for 3 months back in 2011. I'm not going to say the name of the person why we were here, but I'll be glad to see Ann Bremner when we return. So tell me about your podcast.
Podcast is Survivor Squad. I also do my own podcast as well called Moving Past Trauma. My name is Collier Landry, if you guys know me. I have a film on ID called A Murder in Mansfield about the story of my life. I was 11 years old. My father murdered my mother. I put him in prison, where he still is incarcerated to this day. No one believed me except for one detective, and together we solved my mother's murder. So
that sort of inspired the work that you're doing now.
That inspires the work that I do. I partnered up with Tara Newell.
Tara.
Dirty John.
Yeah.
And we do Survivor Squad, sharing stories, allowing survivors to share their own harrowing stories in their own words instead of someone else kind of sharing the story. We're both big advocates of ethical true crime, and we came together because I interviewed her on my podcast, and we said, let's do a podcast together.
That's fantastic. So tell me about CrimeCon and meeting these folks who listen to you. What's that like?
It's so amazing because we get to meet other survivors and a lot of people that have trauma, but, it may not be as big as ours in a sense, but, and then other people that it's as big as ours, and there's so many interesting stories here that it's just so great to connect with other people and then meet people that listen to the Survivor Squad, because I'm so thankful when people do listen to the podcast.
It's awesome. Great work. I'm glad you guys are survivors.
Yes, we are too.
Tragedy in the Hollywood Hills. Prominent therapist Dr. Amy Hardwick found fatally injured under her balcony.
Her ex-boyfriend on trial for her murder.
She had a restraining order against him.
He strangled her, lifted her up over the balcony, and dropped her. He never intended on killing her.
Is this a case of a jilted lover turned obsessive stalker?
The Hollywood Obsession Murder Trial. Coverage continues Tuesday at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
Excuse me, ma'am. I need to see some identification.
Hey, how are you? It's good to see you.
Well, tell me what's happening here. Tell me what's happening here.
Honey, Zone 7 is popping. This is CrimeCon. Lord help us all. We have had more people just come and want to donate and want to help with a cold case. It's unbelievable, Vinny. Unbelievable.
How many cold cases have you heated up now?
We have heated up about 45 total.
Unbelievable.
But this week, I think we're going to really turn the heat up on 2 of them with the help of all of these fantastic people.
That's awesome. Great to see you, Cheryl.
Good to see you too, Cheryl.
Welcome back. We're live in Orlando, Florida at CrimeCon 2023. And back in 2011, I spent a lot of time down here in Orlando. It didn't end the way I thought it was going to end. It was a trial involving a woman. I will not call her a mother because her child's dead. She was tried for murder, found not guilty, and basically walked out of the jail a few days later. But the moment that verdict came down, I was on the set in front of the courthouse in Orange County, Florida, seated next to a woman with long blonde hair. And guess what? I'm back in Orlando, seated next to a woman with long blonde hair. Ann Bremner, trial attorney, fellow of the American College Trial Lawyers, author of the book, Justice in the Age of Judgment. Great to see you, Ann.
Deja vu all over again, right?
It is, it is. Let's just hope that this weekend has a happier ending.
I think anything would be happier than that.
Yeah, I don't know. I shouldn't complain about verdicts. Juries do what they do, but I saw the evidence. You saw the evidence.
Gosh. Yeah.
I saw evidence that we couldn't show on television, and I still can't believe it. But let's leave that behind us.
Okay.
Let's move forward.
It's a different time in Orlando for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk about Idaho.
Yeah.
Idaho. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any chance that we have the same result in Idaho that we had here in 2011?
Zero chance. I shouldn't say zero, like never say never, but it's such a strong case against him. The gag order is going to help, I think, a lot, because everything that's out there so far, Vinny, we know in the search warrants and affidavits and everything else, it's just dead to rights that he's guilty. I told you my ex-husband represented Ted Bundy, so I kind of know that kind of a character pretty well, and he seems to be almost identical, in my opinion.
Really?
Yeah.
But wasn't Ted more of a ladies' man?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I
this
think
guy's not much of a ladies' man, I don't think.
No, he wants to be. He's like, I want to be. But yeah, you're right. Ted Bundy, very handsome, very charming. But the MO, the smarts, the criminology background, all those things just kind of tick off the same kind of list, you know, as Ted Bundy, kind of his MO.
Yeah. When you think of this crime scene, Joseph Scott Morgan, is this, you know, in today's world, we have the evidence from cell phones, right? That digital footprint we always talk about, right? So the digital footprint. We have videos.
Yes.
But we also have an actual crime scene.
Yes, we do.
And I know it's going to be a combination of the three. But if you have to rank the strength of those 3 buckets of evidence in this case, how would you rank them?
Well, I think the leader right now, at least, I think to this point, is probably going to be this digital evidence, you know, the kind of pinging of the phone and location. And, you know, how do you explain that away? And that's on the defense, because I can tell you, in my personal opinion, as a non-attorney, that this is going to be an area that the prosecutor is going to hammer on. You know, how do we explain this away? And is it circumstantial evidence? I don't know. I don't know that it's the same as blood evidence, but you have evidence where allegedly this vehicle is moving about, the phone is moving about, and it's pinging. And so I think that that's significant. I remember during the course of this, I have a vivid memory of them talking about the loop that they went around looking for all the CCTV imagery, you know, and I think you and I may have been on air together, you know, when that came out, and that was significant because they were trying to catch flashes of this vehicle. So you've got the imagery data. As far as the crime scene, this is one of the things that I'm having kind of a hard time trying to understand and put together in my mind, and this is the idea that someone could walk into this environment. I'm not going to use the term pristine, but it's just this environment inhabited by these kids, college kids, and could wreak such havoc. And you're going to have limited physical evidence as it applies to perhaps DNA. We don't have a knife that we know, but one significant thing, and I talked about this today, is that sheath. They talked a lot about the button snap. You and I have talked about it. Button snap's not what interests me in that. What interests me with the sheath is the fact that it has got a location that you pull a belt through. What can we try to understand about how a perpetrator was clad when they go to great lengths to dress perhaps all in black? Maybe their hands are gloved, but yet the most critical tool, I hate to use that term, that you bring to the scene with you is this instrument of destruction, but yet you're not securing it to your body. As a matter of fact, not only are you not securing it, you're leaving it on the bed, but yet you take the knife with you. Why do you not have on a garment that you would wear a belt with, like a jumpsuit? And then what happened to the clothes? Because you're going to be saturated in blood.
Unbelievable. All right. Well, great to catch up with you, and great to see you, Joseph Scott Morgan. I'll see you tomorrow here at the CrimeCon 2023. When we come back, the Low Country comes to Orlando. Don't go anywhere. Why are you here? Really? And do you think Alec Murdaugh was guilty? First time I've ever seen him speechless. First time.
There was pounding on the door. Bang, bang, bang.
He said that we'd seen his face and there was no way that he could ever let us go.
I survived because I'm a born fighter.
I Survive. Next on Court TV.
I've worked hard all my life. I learned the secret to success is speaking in your authentic voice. And I bring that lesson to my show every morning.
Opening Statements with Julie Grant. Weekday mornings at 8, 7 Central. Only on Court TV.
CrimeCon Orlando 2023. You never know who you're going to bump into. You know, you can be walking around. Oh, excuse me, sir. Look who this is. Look at this. Wait. Where are you? She's hiding. When'd you get in?
We got in last night. Kind of late. But we got here in time to see Creighton Waters.
Okay. So you saw the band. Now, how many people have been asking for autographs?
A lot.
A lot?
A lot.
It's like he's a hero.
Not mine, though.
Not yours. So
he's my hero, just not my autograph.
So show me your selfie pose that you use here at CrimeCon. Like if we were taking a selfie together. Terrific. All right, we'll see you. Thank you for your work. Awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. You never know who you're going to bump into at CrimeCon 2023. I mean, everyone's here, and everyone from the Low Country is here. I mean, I go to get something to eat, and there's Dick Harpootlian having some dinner with Joe McCullough. Then I'm walking down, and I see Jim Griffin carrying a box. Last night, opening everything up, playing the guitar, was Creighton Waters, the prosecutor. And guess who's joining me now? Key forensic witness in the trial of convicted double murderer Alec Murdaugh and owner of Kenny Kinsey and Associates LLC, Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Vinnie.
All right, so both of us, first CrimeCon. So what if someone was going to ask you, describe CrimeCon?
Unbelievable. This is the opportunity to pay tribute to the victims and celebrate the good guys.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So now the other part of it is when you walk around, like everyone recognizes you. So when you were, you know, a young man studying what you're studying, and you're a young man and you're going to crime scenes and you're testifying, did you ever think that your life would take this turn because of what you did inside that courtroom that amazed folks around the country?
This was 180 degrees from what I expected. It has been a blessing. It's like I said, unexpected, but it's been a good time, and I'm enjoying helping people and helping victims, and I look forward to the next chapter.
Okay, now this is what I want to know. When you're testifying in this case, you understand how important your testimony is.
Well, I knew it would be important.
Okay, so you know it's important. How do you prepare for that moment? Like the day before you're going to testify, you know you're going up there. You know how significant it is. You know how important it is. How did you prepare for it?
Well, as I said many times, I'm familiar with two of the attorneys, Mr. Griffin and Mr. Harpootlian, and I just studied their style. And you've got a couple ways, because it's an adversarial system. You're an attorney. You were a prosecutor. And my grandmother just spoke to me, and she left this earth 3 decades ago. She said, just be nice. Just be nice. And my job is just to explain to the jury and trust that system, have faith in them men and women, and let them make the heavy decision.
Now, that's an incredible tactic, because as a prosecutor, I had expert witnesses who would testify, and then they get cross-examined, and they take it personally. And it's like, you're attacking my credibility, my expertise. How dare you? You're just a lawyer. You don't know anything. And they wanted to go to battle, and you have a completely different tact, and we saw the results. Have you thought about going out and speaking to groups of experts to explain your philosophy of explaining things to the jury?
Vinnie, I have taught testimony for quite a while, and I'm a college professor, so I try to teach the youngsters that are in my classes. And I'm not saying it's always been that way. You know, just like you said, I would go in there and you feel like it's a win or lose mentality. You got to get rid of that mentality. It's tell the truth, explain the evidence to the jury the best you can, and let them smart men and women on that jury from all different walks, all different backgrounds, let them make the decision. And that's what makes our system the best in the world.
It is. So a lot of buzz about what was happening. We're just about out of time, but a lot of buzz about a potential retrial. If that happened, would you be ready to testify again if you got a new trial?
Vinnie, I have a hard time ever telling Creighton and Mr. Wilson no. We may have to renegotiate, but I would never leave them hanging. But I've got so many clients, so many wonderful clients, victims I'm trying to help. I would never say no, but it would be difficult. I know it would be one heck of a fight, but I'm Scotch-Irish and I like to fight, so it would be okay.
All right. Kenny Kinsey, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Great
friend.
to see you, and really amazing work in that trial.
Thank you, my friend. My pleasure.
All right, folks. Before we go tonight, there's a picture that I want to show you. Please take a look. This is Vicki Turner. She is 17 years old and was last seen in Memphis, Tennessee on September 11th. If you have any information on where Vicki may be, please call the Memphis Police Department. The number is on the screen. You can call 1-800-THE-LOST or you can call 911. Let's see if we can get Vicki to a safe place tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.